From the affidavit of Lawrence Brennan. I have written hundreds of orders, issues, programs, and other writings to forward the religious cloaking of Scientology, all under either Hubbard or Miscavige's orders, or in an attempt to make doable what Hubbard wrote in his policies. I am the primary writer of all of the legal rudiments programs of organized Scientology that were enforced around the world for years. I am the only person who has worked at the highest levels of organized Scientology, dealing with such matters both during the reign of the Guardian's Office and afterwards when the Office of Special Affairs was formed. I have more factual and legal knowledge of the history of organized Scientology's corporate, tax, and other legal matters outside of the courts from the 1970s through early 1984 than any single person currently in organized Scientology or outside of SANE. I believe that I have more knowledge of actions taken by organized Scientology to develop a religious cloaking and why it was done than anyone else currently in organized Scientology. Additionally, I have intimate and detailed knowledge of the creation of much of the current corporate and other legal structure of organized Scientology, as well as what David Miscavige and L. Ron Hubbard had to do with it. I have reason to believe that organized Scientology will try to prevent me from giving such details, including possibly physical harm to myself. Thus, I wish to make one thing clear now. I am of sound mind and happy in my life, and look forward to living many more years of life. I have no desire to commit suicide. Should I die and it appear that I committed suicide, I wish to point out I would never do that, and I would wish to request an investigation into organized Scientology and Miscavige as potentially being behind my death. The Cloak of Religion. Religious cloaking was intentionally used to help organized Scientology make money and to avoid compliance with the myriad of laws that would otherwise apply if it was not so considered. It was determined that the only way to handle many of the legal matters in front of us and still apply Hubbard's policies that had to do with staff, ethics, sales of services, money, delivery of services, and the like was to develop and use a religious cloaking, saying Scientology was a religion, its services religious, its staff members of religious orders, and the like. In developing the religious cloaking for organized Scientology, the following were considered a few of the benefits so that Hubbard policies could be applied. Minimum wages would not have to be paid. Standard employee rights, such as those found in laws like the Fair Labor Standards Act, could be discarded, and thus Hubbard policies, including such things as ethics conditions, the Rehabilitation Project Force, and the like, could be applied without outside interference. The treatment of public Scientologists and the use of their funds would be considered outside the purview of governmental bodies. Couching the demand for and flow of monies within organized Scientology using, quote, religious terms, such as by saying that clear-cut mandatory payments for services were fixed donations and were mandated by the scripture of exchange, was hoped to cut off attempts by governments and others to look into them further. What was considered one of the most important reasons for the religious cloaking was so that the services of Dianetics and Scientology could be delivered without it being considered the practice of psychology and or medicine. It was feared that unless there was a religious cloaking developed and used throughout organized Scientology, that its practices would be outlawed in many parts of the world. The use of scholars to say Scientology was a religion or organized Scientology was a religious organization was carefully planned and executed to forward the cover of religious cloaking. Once religious cloaking was begun in earnest, and many self-serving documents were made and images created to reflect a religious image, it was considered vital to get, quote, experts to support the concept that organized Scientology was in fact an organized religion, its policies, quote, religious scripture, etc. The entire intention behind the acquisition and use of such religious and legal scholars was to create and develop, quote, evidence to support the religious cloaking that could be used in courts and elsewhere where needed. I worked on the obtainment of such scholars' opinions personally, and by supervising others to do same, and I used such scholars' opinions to obtain recognitions that organized Scientology would not otherwise have obtained. At no point were any scholars briefed on either the real controls of organized Scientology or the reasons why religious cloaking was developed. Instead, they tended to be briefed using the religious cloaking materials developed and or by speaking with pre-qualified, briefed Scientologists who were told what to tell the scholars. Two of the things that organized Scientology felt were of the most importance in order to avoid compliance with many laws that were contrary to Hubbard policy were the religious cloaking and a corporate restructuring to make it very difficult, if not impossible, for outsiders to ever get to the main assets of organized Scientology, and to ensure that the real leaders of organized Scientology could be insulated from legal liability by hiding their real controls behind a myriad of corporate and other legal veils. It was considered both a defensive and offensive strategy to have such cloaking, religious and corporate, in place. Defensively, it makes it very difficult for individuals or even governments to force legal compliance of the many types of laws as covered above. It also makes it almost impossible to hold those that really control organized Scientology responsible legally, or to get to the financial assets of organized Scientology spread out around the world. Offensively, it gives organized Scientology a safe base from which to attack critics and or anyone it feels is its enemy. Hiding behind religious cloaking and corporate veils, it can act as a victim when people point out its crimes and injustices, calling them, quote, religious bigots, and even scaring governments, many of whom are not supposed to get involved with religious matters. By calling policies by Hubbard or Miscavige that are otherwise abusive or contrary to law religious scripture, it was hoped to avoid legal scrutiny of same. Much has been done under Miscavige to hide the truth, including the vetting or destruction of files that showed Hubbard and he was in control. This was similar to the mass vetting and removal of files throughout the Guardian's office after the FBI raids in the late 1970s to hide the fact that Hubbard was really running the Guardian's office. Miscavige constantly ordered cover-ups of the truth, even extending to the killing of a biography on L. Ron Hubbard written by Omar Garrison, which Miscavige wanted destroyed as it contained embarrassing truths about Hubbard. Countless abuses have been carried out by Miscavige and the people he controls in the Office of Special Affairs after he was able to hide behind those corporate veils and religious cloaking. This includes the examples of Miscavige spitting on and beating top organized Scientology executives in late '82. There are a number of people who have now gone public telling of Miscavige's beatings and other abuses of others since I first posted this over a year ago. These will show a pattern of brutality and control over decades by Miscavige over organized Scientology, which in turn will show his statements that he did not run organized Scientology under penalty of perjury to be false. In at least 1982 and 1983, Miscavige also ran a new unit of organized Scientology called the Internal Finance Police. Miscavige gave orders for them to carry out many abuses of others to, quote, find and handle alleged, quote, financial crimes against Hubbard and Scientology. They had a mission to actually get people jailed for financial crimes against Scientology. It did not even matter if the person was innocent. They just wanted examples. And a financial crime was anything at all that Hubbard, Miscavige considered took money away from organizations of Scientology, and thus to Hubbard management as well. Their methods of threats, physical abuse, screaming, quote, gang-bang sack checks, and the like were used against anyone and everyone who Miscavige considered were financially, quote, ripping off Scientology organizations or Hubbard. The true danger lurking behind those corporate veils and hidden behind religious cloaking is organized Scientology's intention to control the legal systems and educational systems of the world, to rid the world of its enemies, and to apply its brutal ethics policies to everyone. That is what is in store for the world should the policies of organized Scientology be applied throughout the world. It has long been the intention of organized Scientology to do the above as it uses its front groups like Narconon, Applied Scholastics, the Way to Happiness Foundation, etc., to get inroads into society for organized Scientology.